Elderly man humiliated a gift seller on Christmas Eve, but the package she gave him revealed a secret that brought him to his knees. The gleaming windows of Brighton Investments towered over downtown Evergreen Falls, Colorado, casting long shadows across the snow-covered streets. Inside the top-floor conference room, Catherine Brighton stood before the board of directors, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she paced. Miss Brighton, Richard Coleman, the interim CEO, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. Your father's will is quite clear. To assume the presidency of Brighton Investments, you must demonstrate a genuine connection to the fundamental values that built this company. Catherine gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles white. At 24, she was the youngest person ever considered for the position, and she wasn't about to let her father's outdated demands stop her. I've doubled our profits in the Asian market this quarter alone. Isn't that demonstration enough? The board members exchanged glances. Mrs. Peterson, the oldest member, shook her head slowly. Dear, your father believed that success wasn't just about numbers. He wanted to ensure that whoever leads this company understands its heart and soul. Catherine's mind flashed back to 3 months ago, when she'd received the news of her father's sudden heart attack. She'd been in the middle of closing a major deal in New York, and now that same dedication to work was being used against her. The only proof we have of your connection to the Brighton legacy, Coleman continued, is that old family portrait with your grandmother Margaret wearing the heritage medallion. Without additional evidence of your understanding of the company's values, I'm afraid we'll have to consider other candidates. Catherine's jaw tightened. The portrait in question hung in her father's old office, her grandmother Margaret wearing an ornate gold medallion, looking every bit the family matriarch. The same portrait that now represented Catherine's only claim to her rightful position as CEO. Back in her office, Catherine stared out at the snow-capped mountains. The annual Christmas gala was approaching, her perfect opportunity to prove herself to the board. She'd make it the most spectacular event in the company's history, something that would show everyone she was worthy of the Brighton name. Her assistant, Jenny, knocked softly. The event planners are requesting your final approval on the Christmas trees. They're suggesting ordering from Carson's Luxury Imports. No, Catherine said firmly. I want something local, something that shows we're connected to the community. She pulled up the town's business directory on her computer. What about this place? Miller's Christmas Tree Lot. They've been here for generations. Jenny hesitated. That's a very traditional establishment, rather small and old-fashioned. Perfect. Catherine grabbed her coat. Sometimes you have to embrace tradition to move forward. I'll handle this personally. As she drove her Mercedes through the historic district, Catherine rehearsed her upcoming presentation to the board. She needed to prove she could honor the past while driving the company into the future. A Christmas tree from a local family-owned business would be a perfect symbol. The memory of her father's last words to her echoed in her mind. Katie, there's so much about our family, about what really matters, that you still need to learn. She dismissed his concerns then, too focused on the next big deal. Now those words haunted her, holding the key to her future. Little did Catherine know that her carefully laid plans were about to unravel in ways she could never imagine. Starting with a simple visit to a Christmas tree lot that would shake the very foundation of everything she thought she knew about her family, her future, and herself. Catherine pulled into Miller's Christmas tree lot, parking her Mercedes between 2 weathered pickup trucks. The contrast wasn't lost on her. This wasn't the kind of place Brighton Investments executives usually visited. Still, she reminded herself, this was about proving she understood community values. The lot was busy with families selecting their Christmas trees. Children ran between the rows of pines while parents debated the merits of different trees. The scent of hot chocolate wafted from a small wooden booth where an elderly woman served steaming cups to customers. Excuse me, Catherine called out, approaching a group of workers. I'm looking for whoever's in charge. A woman in her late 60s stepped forward, wiping her hands on her work apron. I'm Sarah Miller. Welcome to our lot. How can I help you? Catherine straightened her posture. I'm Catherine Brighton, from Brighton Investments. We're looking for a special tree for our annual Christmas gala. Sarah's eyes lit up with recognition. Brighton? Oh my, you must be James Brighton's daughter. I remember when this lot used to supply trees for your families. Yes, well, that was a long time ago. Catherine cut her off, surveying the trees with a critical eye. I need something spectacular. These all seem rather ordinary. Several customers turned to watch the exchange. Sarah maintained her friendly demeanor. Each of our trees is carefully selected and maintained. They may not be the exotic varieties you're used to, but they're genuine Colorado pines. Catherine walked through the nearest row, frowning. Do you have anything more impressive? Something that wouldn't look out of place at a high-end corporate event? And these trees have graced homes in this community for generations, Sarah explained patiently. They're part of Evergreen Falls tradition. Tradition won't impress the board of directors, Catherine muttered, then louder. Perhaps you don't understand. This event could determine the future of Brighton investments. I can't present them with something this basic. A small crowd had gathered, watching the exchange with disapproval. Sarah's smile faded slightly. Miss Brighton, every tree here has its own character and beauty. Maybe if you took some time to really look. Look? Catherine laughed sharply. I've seen enough. This is exactly why small businesses like yours struggle. You're stuck in the past, refusing to adapt to modern expectations. I mean, just look at this place. It's practically a relic. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Sarah stood very still, her hand unconsciously touching the gold medallion hanging from her neck. We may be simple, but we have something money can't buy: integrity and community trust. Catherine's retort died in her throat as her eyes fixed on Sarah's medallion. It was identical to the one in her grandmother's portrait. The same intricate design, the same delicate chain. The world seemed to tilt sideways. That medallion? Catherine stepped forward, her voice unsteady. Where did you get that? Sarah's hand clasped the medallion protectively. It was a gift from a dear friend, many years ago. The familiar design swam before Catherine's eyes. Memories of the portrait, her father's words, the board's demands, everything blurred together. The last thing she heard was Sarah's concerned voice calling out as the ground rushed up to meet her. When Catherine came to, she was lying on a worn couch in a small office. The walls were covered with old photographs, and the smell of pine was even stronger here. Sarah Miller stood nearby, holding a glass of water and wearing an expression of concern that made Catherine uncomfortable. Welcome back, Sarah said softly. You gave us quite a scare. Catherine tried to sit up, her head spinning. I'm sorry, I don't usually. Her eyes fixed again on the medallion around Sarah's neck. That medallion, please, I need to know where you got it. It's exactly like the one in my grandmother's portrait. Sarah's expression changed, becoming both softer and more serious. Yes, she said quietly. I know. Margaret and I wore matching medallions for a very special reason. Catherine felt the room spin again, but for an entirely different reason. You knew my grandmother? The old woman's eyes filled with tears. Knew her? Catherine, your grandmother Margaret was my dearest friend in the world, and there's so much about her, about your family, that you need to know. Catherine sat up slowly, taking in Sarah Miller's small office. Family photos covered the walls, and through the window she could see customers still browsing for trees in the lot. Everything felt surreal. Here, drink this. Sarah handed her a cup of tea. You've had quite a shock. How did you know my grandmother? Catherine asked, her voice unsteady. Sarah settled into an old chair across from her. Margaret and I met at the Sterling Textile Factory in 1973. We were both 19, working the same shift. Catherine nearly dropped her cup. Factory? There must be some mistake. My grandmother was a Brighton. She became a Brighton, Sarah corrected gently. But Margaret started just like me, a young woman trying to make her way in the world. We worked side by side for 3 years before she met your grandfather, Howard Brighton. That's impossible. Catherine shook her head. The Brightons have always been... we're part of Evergreen Falls' elite. Sarah smiled knowingly. That came later. Your grandmother never forgot where she came from. In fact, she stood and walked to an old filing cabinet. I think you need to see something. Sarah pulled out a worn photo album and placed it in Catherine's lap. The first photo showed 2 young women in factory uniforms. arms around each other's shoulders, laughing at the camera. Catherine's hand trembled as she recognized her grandmother's smile, the same one from the portrait in her father's office. "This was us during our lunch breaks," Sarah continued, pointing to more photos. "We'd sit by the factory windows, sharing sandwiches and dreams. Margaret always said she'd help others achieve their dreams too, once she had the means." "And the medallions?" Catherine touched the one around Sarah's neck. "We bought them together at a local craft fair. They cost us each a week's wages." Sarah's eyes grew distant with memory. "We made a pact that day. No matter what happened in our lives, we'd never forget where we came from, and we'd always help others who needed a hand up." Catherine flipped through more pages, seeing her grandmother in a new light. Photos of company picnics, community events, and holiday celebrations. Margaret was always there, always with Sarah, always wearing the medallion. "When she married your grandfather," Sarah continued, "people thought she'd change. But Margaret stayed true to her word. She used her new position to help countless families in Evergreen Falls. Help them how? Small business loans that banks wouldn't give, scholarships for workers' children, emergency funds for families in crisis, all done quietly, through me, so the high society folks wouldn't gossip." Sarah paused. "This tree lot? Margaret helped my late husband and me buy it when the previous owner was going to sell to developers." Catherine's mind raced. None of this aligned with the family history she knew. "But what about the fire? All our family records were destroyed." Sarah's expression changed. "Is that what they told you?" "Catherine, those records weren't all destroyed. I have copies of everything. Margaret insisted I keep them safe." She walked to her desk and unlocked a drawer. "Your grandmother knew someday they'd be needed." "Why would she?" Catherine stopped as Sarah placed a stack of letters on the table. She recognized her grandmother's handwriting immediately. "Margaret knew the importance of remembering where you come from," Sarah said softly. "She believed true success wasn't just about making money, it was about lifting others up along the way." Catherine picked up the top letter with shaking hands. It was dated just months before her grandmother's death. "To my dearest granddaughter," it began, "if you're reading this, then Sarah has deemed it time for you to know the truth about our family's legacy." The office door opened, and a young worker stuck his head in. "Mrs. Miller, the Anderson family needs help with their tree." "Take care of it, Tommy," Sarah said, not taking her eyes off Catherine. "Miss Brighton and I have 15 years of history to discuss." The next morning, Catherine arrived at Miller's Christmas tree lot wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual business attire. Sarah met her at the entrance, surprise evident on her face. "I want to learn," Catherine said simply, "about my grandmother, about what she did here." Sarah nodded and handed her a pair of work gloves. "Then you'll learn the way she did, by doing." Throughout the morning, Catherine worked alongside the lot's employees, helping customers select trees and learning the stories of the people who worked there. Tommy, the young man from yesterday, turned out to be a college student whose tuition was partially covered by what Sarah called the Margaret Fund. "Your grandmother set it up," Sarah explained as they took a break. "Every year we help 3 students with college expenses. Tommy's studying business, just like his mother did 20 years ago, also with Margaret's help." Catherine watched a family loading a tree onto their car. "How many people has this place helped?" Sarah pulled out a thick ledger from her office. "Every person, every story, it's all here." Margaret insisted on keeping detailed records. As Catherine flipped through the pages, names and numbers jumped out at her. Hundreds of families, thousands of dollars in assistance, decades of quiet generosity. The Rodriguez family, small business loan for their restaurant in '92. The Wilsons, emergency medical funds in '88. The Thompsons, down payment for their first home in '95. Sarah pointed out various entries. Your grandmother believed in people when no one else would. But how did she keep this secret? Surely someone at the company knew. Your father knew, Sarah said quietly. He continued supporting the fund after Margaret passed, said it was the heart of what Brighton Investments should be. Catherine felt a pang of grief for her father. How much had she missed about him too? A commotion near the entrance caught their attention. An elderly couple was struggling with selecting a tree. The Hendersons, Sarah explained. George lost his job last year. They almost lost their house, but we helped them refinance through one of Margaret's old contacts at the bank. Catherine walked over to assist them. As she helped measure the tree, Mrs. Henderson smiled warmly. "You remind me of someone," she said. "There used to be a woman who helped out here years ago, always wore a medallion like Mrs. Miller's." "That was my grandmother," Catherine replied, surprised by the pride in her voice. Later, while organizing delivery schedules, Catherine overheard two workers talking near the storage shed. "Did you hear? That developer's been asking questions again? About buying the lot? Sarah would never sell." "Yeah, but I heard they're not taking no for an answer this time." Catherine's corporate instincts kicked in. Something about their tone made her uneasy. She moved closer, pretending to check inventory. "They're saying the whole historic district might be rezoned," one worker continued in a hushed voice. "Big changes coming. Keep your voice down," the other warned. "We don't want to worry Sarah. Not with everything she does for everyone." Catherine's phone buzzed. A message from Richard Coleman. "Board meeting tomorrow. Development proposal for downtown expansion. Your input required." She looked around the lot, seeing it with new eyes. The families choosing trees, Sarah helping the Hendersons, Tommy studying between customers. This wasn't just a business, it was her grandmother's legacy, a network of hope and support woven into the fabric of the community. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, noticing her expression. "Just work," Catherine replied, pocketing her phone. But her mind was racing. What exactly was the board planning? And why did she suddenly feel like she was standing on the edge of a much bigger revelation? The Brighton Investments boardroom felt different this morning. Catherine sat silently as Richard Coleman presented the development plans on the large screen. "The Evergreen Falls Historic District Revitalization Project," Coleman announced. $100 million shopping complex that will transform downtown. The centerpiece will be right where that old Christmas tree lot currently stands. Catherine's stomach tightened. That lot has been there for generations. "Exactly," Coleman smiled. "Prime real estate being wasted on a seasonal business. Our investors are very excited about this opportunity." Mrs. Peterson, the eldest board member, leaned forward. "And the current tenants?" "Fair compensation packages will be offered," Coleman assured. "Catherine, this project needs your public support. Back this, and the board will have all the proof they need of your ability to lead Brighton Investments into the future." Catherine stared at the architectural renderings. "You want me to help shut down Miller's lot?" "We want you to help progress happen," Coleman corrected. "Think about it. Your first major project as CEO. The press will love it. Young female executive leads historic development." After the meeting, Coleman caught up with Catherine in the hallway. "I need your answer by the end of the week. This is your chance, Catherine, everything you've worked for." Back at the tree lot, Catherine watched Sarah helping a young family select their tree. How could she tell this woman about the development plans? About the choice she faced? Her phone buzzed with texts from concerned lot workers. "Bank refused to renew my mom's loan." "Health inspector showed up third time this month." "Property taxes suddenly doubled." Something wasn't right. Catherine called Jenny, her assistant. "I need you to dig into recent municipal decisions affecting the historic district." Quietly. That evening, she discovered Sarah in the office, looking worried over paperwork. "3 more families got pressure from the bank today," Sarah sighed. "It's like the whole town's turning against us." "What do you mean, pressure?" "Loans suddenly due, permit problems, tax reassessments. In 30 years, I've never seen anything like it." Sarah looked up. Your grandmother would have known what to do. Catherine's phone buzzed again. Jenny had found something. Municipal records showed a pattern. Businesses in the historic district were being systematically squeezed through various regulations and financial pressures. "Sarah, I need to show you something." Catherine pulled out her tablet, displaying the board's development plans. "They want to build a shopping complex. Here, where the lot is." Sarah's face paled. "So that's why." She touched her medallion. "They're trying to force us out." "There's more," Catherine admitted. "They want me to publicly support the project. If I do, I become CEO. If I don't, they'll find someone else who will," Sarah finished. She stood and walked to the window. You know, your grandmother faced a similar choice once. The factory where we worked, they wanted to shut it down, move operations overseas. They offered her a position on the board if she supported it. What did she do? She found another way. She always said real leadership isn't about choosing between success and doing right. It's about finding a path to both. Catherine's phone lit up with a message from Coleman. Board expects your public statement of support tomorrow. This is it. Your moment. Sarah turned back from the window. Whatever you decide, Catherine, remember, that medallion I wear isn't just jewelry. It's a promise. A promise your grandmother kept her entire life. Catherine looked at the development plans, then at the photos on Sarah's wall. Decades of families, children, communities built around this place. Her grandmother's real legacy wasn't in the Brighton Investments boardroom. It was here, in the lives she'd touched. I need to make some calls, Catherine said, standing up. And Sarah, don't worry about the bank. I think I just figured out what my grandmother would do. Catherine sat alone in her father's old office late that night, surrounded by company records. The more she dug, the more questions emerged. Something about her father's sudden death didn't add up. She opened his laptop, using the password she'd found in his personal files. His email archive revealed dozens of exchanges with Sarah Miller over the years. They had been working together, continuing Margaret's legacy of community support. A knock at the door startled her. Jenny entered with a stack of files. I found something strange in the financial records, her assistant said. 3 months before your father died, he started investigating the board's real estate holdings. Catherine scrolled through her father's emails. Look at this. He was planning to expand the community support program. He wanted to make it official company policy. There's more. Jenny handed her a document. The night before he died, he scheduled an emergency board meeting, but he never made it there. Catherine's hands trembled as she opened another folder on the laptop labeled MB Legacy. Inside was a video file dated the day before his death. She clicked play. Her father's face filled the screen. Katie, if you're watching this, something's happened to me. What I'm about to tell you about the board, about our family's real legacy, changes everything. Tears filled her eyes. This was the father she remembered, not the cold corporate image others painted of him. The board is planning something big, he continued. They're buying up properties through shell companies, pressuring local businesses. But that's not the Brighton way. Your grandmother built this company on helping people, not exploiting them. Catherine paused the video as Sarah's words echoed in her mind. Real leadership isn't about choosing between success and doing right. Her phone buzzed, a text from Coleman, waiting for your statement of support. Don't throw away your future. She resumed the video. Her father looked tired, worried. I've collected evidence of everything. It's all in a safe deposit box at First National. The key is... The video cut off abruptly. Jenny, what was the official cause of my father's death? Heart attack, according to the reports. At 48, with no prior health issues? Catherine shook her head. Find out who had access to his office that night. As Jenny left, Catherine opened the last email her father had written to Sarah. Meeting tomorrow to expose everything. Margaret would be proud of what we're about to do. Her phone rang, Sarah's number. Catherine, you need to come to the lot. Now. Someone broke in. When Catherine arrived, she found Sarah standing in the ransacked office. File cabinets were open, paper scattered everywhere. They were looking for something specific, Sarah said, picking up scattered photos. The ledger with Margaret's records is gone. Catherine noticed something on the floor. A business card from Brighton Investments. On the back was a handwritten note. Last chance. Take the offer. Sarah, there's something you need to know about my father's death. Catherine played the video on her phone. Sarah's face went pale. James was going to expose them. The night before he died, he called me, said he had proof of everything. She paused. Catherine, the fire that supposedly destroyed your family records, it happened the same night. Why didn't you tell me this before? I promised your father I'd wait until you were ready, until you understood what the Brighton name really means. Sarah picked up a fallen photo of Margaret. Your grandmother used to say, money builds businesses, but integrity builds legacies. Catherine's phone buzzed again. Coleman demanding her statement of support, but now she understood what she had to do. Her father and grandmother had died protecting their real legacy. She wouldn't let their sacrifice be in vain. Sarah, where's your copy of the ledger, the one you showed me yesterday? Safe. I knew they might try something like this. But Catherine, if you go against the board... I'm not going against them. Catherine stood straighter. I'm going to take them down. For my father, for my grandmother, for everyone they've tried to destroy. Catherine spent the next morning gathering evidence. With Jenny's help, she tracked the shell companies buying properties in the historic district, all leading back to board members. Look at this, Jenny pointed to her screen. Mrs. Peterson voted against these acquisitions 3 times, then suddenly changed her mind last month. Right after her grandson's company got that mysterious contract, Catherine added. They're all compromised. Her phone rang. Sarah. Catherine, the Henderson family is here. You need to hear their story. At the tree lot, George Henderson sat with his wife, hands shaking as he held out a letter. The bank's foreclosing on our house. They say our refinancing agreement was processed incorrectly. The same bank that's on the board of Brighton Investments, Catherine muttered, examining the letter. We're not the only ones, Mrs. Henderson added. Half the neighborhood got similar notices. They're trying to clear us all out. Catherine looked around the lot. Fewer customers today. People were scared. The development plan was working exactly as intended. I won't let this happen, she declared. But I need your help, all of you. Throughout the day, families came forward with their stories. Catherine and Sarah documented everything. The pressure tactics, the sudden loan recalls, the mysterious property inspections. Tommy, the college student, brought more news. My mom's restaurant? Health department's trying to shut it down. 3rd inspection this week. Your mother's restaurant is next to Miller's lot, Catherine realized. They want the whole block. A familiar voice spoke from behind her. Smart girl, just like your father. Catherine turned to face Mrs. Peterson from the board. The elderly woman looked tired. Why are you here? Catherine asked. Because I can't sleep at night anymore, Mrs. Peterson said quietly. Your father was right about everything. I've got proof. Inside Sarah's office, Mrs. Peterson laid out documents. The board's been planning this for years. They needed your father out of the way when he started asking questions. They killed him, Catherine finished. They made it look like a heart attack. I didn't know then, but when they used my grandson's company to blackmail me, Mrs. Peterson's voice broke. Your grandmother would be ashamed of what we've become. Catherine's phone buzzed. Coleman again. The press release goes out tomorrow. Last chance to be on the right side of this. We need more than documents, Catherine said. We need people to speak up. That's where I can help. A new voice joined them. Maria Rodriguez, owner of the threatened restaurant, stood in the doorway with several other business owners. We're done being afraid. Catherine looked at the group. Families her grandmother had helped, now ready to stand together. The board thinks they can bully us individually. But together we're stronger than they are. Sarah finished, touching her medallion. Catherine's phone rang. Jenny again. I found something in your father's bank records. The safe deposit box, he made 2 keys. 2? Catherine looked at Sarah. Did my father give you? Sarah was already pulling a chain from around her neck. Next to the medallion hung a small key. He said to keep it safe until the right time. Catherine's hands shook as she took the key. First thing tomorrow, we get those documents. But tonight, she turned to the gathered families. Tonight we plan our defense. And I think I know exactly how to do it. Mrs. Peterson stood straighter. The board meets at 9 tomorrow. I'll make sure you have your chance to speak. Oh, I'll do more than speak, Catherine said, her grandmother's determination flowing through her. I'll show them what the Brighton name really stands for. As the group began planning, Sarah pulled Catherine aside. You know they'll try to stop you. The board won't go down without a fight. Catherine thought of her father's video, her grandmother's legacy, and all the families counting on her. Let them try. Some things are worth fighting for. Before dawn, Catherine and Sarah met the community leaders at Maria's restaurant. The empty dining room became their war room, with plans and documents spread across tables. The cooperative idea could work, Maria said, examining Catherine's proposal. But we'd need startup capital. My grandmother's ledger shows she maintained a separate account for community investment, Catherine explained. If we can prove the board's illegal activities, we can force them to restore those funds. Sarah spread out a map of the historic district. Each of these properties has a story. Families Margaret helped, businesses she saved. That's our strength, Catherine pointed to the map. Not just buildings, community. The board sees assets. We see homes, dreams, generations of history. Tommy raised his hand. My business class professor says the best defense is a good offense. Why wait for them to destroy us? He's right, George Henderson added. We should take this public before they do. Catherine nodded. I've been thinking about that. The Christmas gala is in 3 days. Every major investor and press outlet will be there. It's risky, Sarah cautioned. If we move too soon, we have something they don't. Catherine pulled out her father's files. Truth. And tomorrow morning we get the rest of it from that safe deposit box. Jenny arrived with more documents. The shell companies all trace back to offshore accounts. Classic money laundering. Just like Dad suspected, Catherine said. But we need more than paper trails. We need faces, stories, real people. Maria stood up. You've got them. My family's been here 30 years because of Margaret Brighton. We'll tell our story. Others joined in, sharing how Margaret and Sarah had helped them over the years. Each story strengthened their resolve. The cooperative structure is sound, Tommy said, reviewing the business plan. Each property owner becomes a shareholder. We pool resources, share costs. And the tree lot becomes the community center, Sarah added. Just like Margaret always wanted. Catherine's phone buzzed. Coleman. She put it on speaker. Catherine, be reasonable. Think about your future. The board is willing to be generous. Like you were generous with my father. Catherine's voice was steel. It's over, Richard. We know everything. You're making a serious mistake, Coleman warned. Some fights you can't win. Watch me, Catherine ended the call. But doubt crept in. What if he's right? What if we're not strong enough? Sarah touched her medallion. Your grandmother faced the same fears when she started helping people. Want to know what she said? What? Courage isn't about being strong enough. It's about doing what's right, even when you're scared. Catherine looked at the faces around her. Families who'd worked hard, built lives, created something worth fighting for. Her grandmother had seen their potential. Her father had died protecting them. Okay, she stood straighter. Let's go through the plan again. Tomorrow morning, Sarah and I get the documents from the bank. Then, a crash interrupted her. Outside, car alarms blared. They rushed to the windows. In the parking lot, 3 cars belonging to business owners had their windows smashed. On each windshield was a note. Take the deal or else. They're getting desperate, Mrs. Peterson said, joining them. The board's called an emergency meeting tonight. They're moving up the timeline. Then so are we, Catherine decided. Jenny, call every media contact we have. Maria, start calling families. Tommy, get your classmates on social media. It's time everyone knew the truth about Brighton Investments. What about the gala? Sarah asked. Oh, we're still having a gala, Catherine smiled grimly. But it's going to be very different from what the board expects. As the group sprang into action, Sarah pulled Catherine aside. You know this might not work. We could lose everything. Catherine touched her own neck, where her grandmother's medallion would soon hang. No, the board thinks everything has a price, but some things, community, integrity, justice, those are priceless. That's what my grandmother understood. That's what we're fighting for. The next morning brought devastating news. Several families had withdrawn their support overnight. Catherine found Sarah at the tree lot, reading their emails. They got to the Martinez family with a cash offer, Sarah said. The Turners too. Can't blame them. They've got kids to think about. Catherine's phone rang. Jenny with worse news. The bank claims they have no record of your father's safe deposit box. They're saying it was closed months ago. That's impossible, Sarah protested when Catherine told her. James was so careful. More calls came in. The health department had shut down Maria's restaurant. Tommy's scholarship was suddenly under review. The pressure was mounting. People are scared, Maria said, joining them. Without those documents from the safe deposit box, it's our word against the board's. Catherine paced the office. There has to be something we're missing. Dad wouldn't have left us without backup. Sarah sat quietly, touching her medallion. "There's something I haven't told you, something about your grandmother's last days." "What do you mean?" "Margaret knew she was dying. The night before she passed, she made me promise to tell you this story when the time was right." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She said, "When Katie faces her moment of truth, tell her about Christmas Eve, 1975. Catherine sat down. "What happened then?" "The factory was closing. Hundreds would lose their jobs right before Christmas. Your grandfather, Howard Brighton, was on the board then. They'd voted to move operations overseas. But that didn't happen. The factory stayed open." Sarah nodded. "Because Margaret stood up at the shareholders' meeting, told them about every family that would be affected, showed them that doing right was also good business. Howard was so impressed by her courage, he not only voted to keep the factory open, he asked her to marry him the next day." "Why tell me this now?" "Because Margaret said you'd need to know that the Brighton name was built on courage, not compromise." Sarah unclasped her medallion. "She also said that when you understood that, it would be time for you to wear this." Catherine stared at the medallion. "Sarah, I can't take that." "You have to. It's what Margaret wanted, what your father wanted." Sarah placed it around Catherine's neck. They both knew this day would come. Suddenly, Catherine's phone lit up with messages. Someone had leaked their cooperative plan to the press, but twisted to make it look like a hostile takeover attempt. "The board's trying to turn the community against us," Jenny reported. "They're painting Catherine as a spoiled heiress trying to seize control." Catherine touched the medallion, feeling its weight. "They don't understand. This was never about control, it's about legacy." Mrs. Peterson burst in. "Coleman's called a press conference. He's going to announce the development plan tonight. But the gala's not for 2 days," Maria protested. "They're accelerating everything," Mrs. Peterson explained. "They're claiming community support based on the families who withdrew." Catherine felt the walls closing in. Everything they'd worked for was unraveling. Then she noticed something. A small engraving on the back of the medallion. "Sarah, was this always here?" Sarah looked closer. "I never noticed. It's a set of numbers." Catherine's eyes widened. "Not numbers, a date. Dad's last day at the office." She turned to Jenny. "Check the security footage from that night. Look for anywhere he might have hidden something." "Already on it," Jenny typed frantically. "Wait, there's a gap in the footage. 20 minutes missing, right after he left his office. Where did he go next?" Jenny scrolled through the logs. "The records room, in the basement." Catherine stood. "That's where we'll find what we need. The real documents, the proof, it's all there." "The board changed all the access codes," Mrs. Moffat Peterson warned. "Maybe," Catherine smiled grimly. "But I bet they didn't change the ventilation system my grandfather installed. The one Margaret used to save the factory plans in 1975. Sarah's eyes lit up with recognition. "The maintenance tunnel. It's still there?" "Only a Brighton would know about it," Catherine said, "and only a Brighton would know how to use it." The maintenance tunnel was exactly where Catherine's grandmother had described it. As she and Jenny made their way through the narrow passage, Catherine thought about all the secrets these walls held. "There," Jenny pointed to a vent opening. "The records room is right below us." Through the grating, they could see the room was empty. Catherine carefully removed the vent cover and dropped down, using her phone's light to search the rows of filing cabinets. "Over here," Jenny whispered, finding a loose panel in the wall. Behind it was a heavy envelope marked with a small medallion symbol. Catherine's hands shook as she opened it. Inside were USB drives, documents, and a letter in her father's handwriting. For Catherine, the truth about Brighton Investments. Back at the tree lot, the community had gathered. Maria's restaurant staff had brought food. Tommy and his college friends were setting up a live stream. Local reporters were starting to arrive. "Your father documented everything," Jenny said, reviewing the files. "Offshore accounts, fake companies, bribes, years of evidence." Catherine addressed the crowd. "The board thinks they can buy us out, scare us away. They forgot what my grandmother knew. Real power comes from community." She shared her father's findings. People gasped at the scope of corruption. But more importantly, they shared their own stories. 3 generations of the Rodriguez family spoke about how Margaret Brighton had helped them start their business. She co-signed our first loan, Maria's father said, back when no bank would touch us. Others stepped forward. The Williams family told how Margaret had secretly paid for their daughter's medical treatment. The Johnsons revealed how she'd helped them keep their home during the recession. Local news crews captured everything. Social media lit up with #Brighton legacy stories. The truth was spreading faster than the board could contain it. Then Sarah made an announcement that changed everything. "I've been saving this," she said, bringing out a box of old VHS tapes. Margaret recorded every person she helped, said someday people would need to know what Brighton Investments really stood for. They played the tapes on a projector. Decades of community history unfolded. Marriages, births, businesses opening, homes being saved. Margaret Brighton was there for all of it, usually with Sarah by her side. "Look," Tommy pointed to one clip. "That's my mom's graduation. Mrs. Brighton paid for her college." More people arrived as word spread. The parking lot filled with families, each with their own story of how Margaret Brighton or Sarah Miller had touched their lives. Catherine's phone buzzed. Coleman was calling again. "You need to stop this," he demanded. "The board is prepared to take legal action." "Perfect," Catherine replied. "Let's do this in court. I'm sure the SEC will be very interested in these documents." "You'll destroy everything your family built." "No," Catherine looked at the gathering crowd. "I'm saving what my family really built. This community." The local news anchor approached Catherine. "Miss Brighton, would you like to make a statement?" Catherine touched her grandmother's medallion. "Yes. Brighton Investments was founded on a promise that success means helping others succeed. Tonight, we're renewing that promise." She outlined the cooperative plan, how the historic district would be preserved and revitalized by the community, for the community, how Brighton Investments would return to its founding principles. "My grandmother believed in people," Catherine concluded. "She knew that profit without purpose is meaningless. Tonight, we're choosing purpose." Sarah joined her, holding up one of the old VHS tapes. "Margaret once told me, money builds businesses, but community builds legacies. Tonight proves she was right." As the crowd cheered, Catherine's phone lit up with messages from board members. They were starting to crack. "We've got them running scared," Jenny reported. "But tomorrow's board meeting will be the real battle." Catherine looked at the united community before her. "Let them come. We're ready." The Brighton Investments boardroom was packed. Board members sat stone-faced as Catherine stood at the podium, her grandmother's medallion catching the morning light. "Before we begin," Coleman interrupted, "I move to dismiss Catherine Brighton from consideration for CEO, citing her recent disruptive activities." "Motion denied," Mrs. Peterson spoke up. "As senior board member, I invoke Article 7 of our charter. Miss Brighton has the right to present her case." Catherine nodded to Jenny, who started the presentation. The evidence appeared on screen: years of illegal dealings, property manipulation, and community exploitation. "This company was founded on helping people succeed," Catherine said. "Instead, you've used it to destroy the very community that built it." Coleman leaned forward. "These are baseless accusations." "Really?" Catherine played her father's video. The board watched in silence as James Brighton detailed their corruption. Then she showed Margaret's archived footage, decades of community investment and growth. "Your father was a fool," Coleman snapped, "just like your grandmother, throwing away profits on charity cases." The boardroom doors opened. Sarah Miller walked in, followed by dozens of community members. Maria Rodriguez, the Hendersons, Tommy and his mother. Families spanning generations. "These charity cases built this company," Catherine declared. "Their hard work, their trust, their loyalty, that's the real Brighton legacy." Maria stepped forward. "My restaurant employs 30 people, sends 4 kids to college, all because Margaret Brighton believed in my family." Others shared their stories, each one a testament to how community investment had multiplied over decades. "This is your idea of business?" Coleman scoffed. "Sentiment over profits?" "No," Catherine pulled up the financial projections. "This is smart business. Our cooperative plan will generate more sustainable growth than your development project. The numbers don't lie." Jenny distributed reports showing how Margaret's community investments had created lasting value, how stable neighborhoods and loyal customers had weathered every economic downturn. "The press is waiting outside," Mrs. Peterson announced. "They're very interested in this story. Either way it goes." Coleman's face reddened. "This is blackmail." "This is accountability," Catherine corrected. "The choice is simple. Return to our founding principles or face federal investigation for fraud and corruption." The board members whispered among themselves. Years of secrets were unraveling before their eyes. "I move to adopt Catherine Brighton's cooperative development plan," Mrs. Peterson declared, "and to appoint her as CEO, effective immediately." "Second," another member quickly added. "All in favor?" Mrs. Peterson asked. Hands raised one by one. Coleman watched his support crumble as the vote passed overwhelmingly. "This isn't over," he growled, standing to leave. "Actually it is," Catherine replied. "Security is waiting outside. The FBI too. They're very interested in those offshore accounts." As Coleman was led away, the community members cheered. Sarah hugged Catherine, tears in her eyes. "Margaret would be so proud," she whispered. Catherine turned to the board. "Let's be clear. This company's real assets aren't our buildings or stocks. They're the people and communities we serve. That's what my grandmother understood. That's how we'll move forward." She outlined immediate actions: restoring the Community Investment Fund, halting predatory property acquisitions, establishing the Cooperative Development Program. "Your grandmother changed my life," Tommy's mother said. "Now you're doing the same for a new generation." Catherine touched her medallion, feeling the weight of legacy and promise it carried. "This isn't just a victory for us. It's a victory for every person who believes that business can be both profitable and principled." As reporters flooded in to capture the historic moment, Catherine saw her father's photo on the wall. Finally, she understood what he'd tried to tell her. Success wasn't just about making money. It was about making a difference. 1 year later, the historic district of Evergreen Falls was transformed, not by demolition and development, but by renewal and community spirit. The Miller's Christmas tree lot had become the centerpiece of something much bigger. Catherine stood in what used to be just a seasonal lot, now a thriving year-round community center. Local businesses operated from renovated storefronts. A job training program occupied the second floor. The coffee shop employed local students, and the daycare center helped working parents. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Sarah said, joining her at the window. They watched families selecting Christmas trees in the front lot, just as they had for generations. "The board meeting's quarterly report shows we made the right choice," Catherine replied. "Profits are up 20% since we implemented the cooperative model." Sarah smiled. "Margaret always said doing good was good business." The community center buzzed with activity. Maria's restaurant had expanded, now offering cooking classes. Tommy, fresh from graduating business school, was teaching entrepreneurship to high school students. "Miss Brighton?" A young woman approached with her daughter. "I wanted to thank you. The small business loan from the Margaret Brighton Fund helped me start my own therapy practice." Catherine recognized her from the fund's application, a single mother who'd struggled to get traditional financing. "How's it going?" "I have 15 clients now," she beamed, "and I'm hiring another therapist next month." This was what her grandmother had envisioned. One success creating opportunities for others, building a web of community support and growth. The Henderson family arrived, George proudly wearing his new maintenance supervisor uniform. Their house was safe now, their mortgage restructured through the cooperative's housing program. "The news crew is here," Jenny announced, now Catherine's full partner in community development. "They want to do a piece on the 1-year anniversary." Catherine watched the center fill with people arriving for the celebration. Each face told a story of transformation, not just of the community, but of what business could be when profit met purpose. "Remember last Christmas?" Sarah asked, touching her medallion. She still wore it on special occasions, sharing it with Catherine as a symbol of their shared mission. Catherine remembered the fear, the uncertainty, the desperate fight to save what mattered. Now she saw something different. Hope, growth, possibility. The local news reporter set up for the interview. "Miss Brighton, how do you respond to critics who said combining business with social responsibility would fail?" Catherine gestured to the bustling center. "The numbers speak for themselves. Our company's value has increased. Our community investments yield consistent returns. We're proving that ethical business is profitable business. And the cooperative model? Each business owner is a stakeholder, Catherine explained. They have a voice in decisions, share in profits, support each other's growth. It's not charity, it's smart economics. More families arrived for the celebration. The Rodriguez family set up food stations. Tommy's students demonstrated their business projects. Children played in the newly built playground dedicated to James Brighton. Mrs. Peterson, now retired from the board, but still active in community projects, joined them. You've done something remarkable here, Catherine. You've changed the definition of corporate success. No, Catherine corrected. We've returned to its true definition. My grandmother understood that. Sarah opened the box she'd brought. New medallions, created in honor of the center's first anniversary. Margaret's legacy continues. Each of these represents a promise to remember where we came from and to help others succeed. Catherine presented the medallions to the first graduating class of their entrepreneurship program. 20 new business owners, each with plans to grow within the cooperative. This isn't just about wearing a symbol, she told them. It's about living its meaning. Success isn't measured by what we gain, but by what we give back. The celebration continued into evening. Families gathered around the Christmas trees, sharing stories of the past year's changes. Children played in fresh snow while parents discussed new business ideas. In Sarah's office, now a museum of community history, Catherine found her father's photo next to her grandmother's. The legacy wall showed 3 generations of Brighton leadership, each understanding that true wealth wasn't in bank accounts, but in lives touched and communities strengthened. Your father would be proud, Sarah said, joining her. You didn't just save his legacy, you made it stronger. Catherine touched her medallion, thinking of the journey from that first confrontation at the tree lot to now. I finally understand what he meant about learning what really matters. Outside, the Christmas lights twinkled across the historic district. Every storefront was occupied, every business thriving. The streets were full of families, neighbors, community. We're expanding the program, Catherine announced, taking the cooperative model to other cities, teaching other companies how to build community partnerships. Sarah smiled. Margaret always said success should multiply, not divide. The evening ended with a tradition Catherine had started, sharing success stories from the past year. People stood up one by one, telling how the cooperative had changed their lives. A young man who'd started a tech repair business, a grandmother who'd opened a bakery, a group of teens who'd created a successful lawn care service. Each story proved what Margaret Brighton had known all along, that business could be a force for good, that profit and purpose could work together. As the crowd dispersed, Catherine and Sarah stood in the lot where it all began. The same space where Catherine had once showed such disdain, now transformed into a symbol of community renewal. You know what the best part is? Sarah said, looking at the families heading home. This is just the beginning. Catherine nodded, watching the next generation of entrepreneurs leaving with their new medallions. Each one carried a piece of her grandmother's vision, her father's courage, and the community's strength. The true meaning of legacy, she realized, isn't what we leave behind. It's what we help others build for tomorrow. The Christmas trees stood tall in the evening light, witnesses to a transformation not just of a business or a community, but of what was possible when people chose to believe in something bigger than themselves. This was the real Brighton legacy, not towers of steel and glass, but a network of lives interconnected by hope, opportunity, and the simple promise contained in a medallion passed down through generations. That success meant helping others succeed, that community was the greatest wealth of all. As the celebration wound down, Catherine received an unexpected visitor. An elderly man approached her, leaning on a cane. Miss Brighton, he said, his voice wavering. I worked at the factory with your grandmother, back in '75. Catherine recognized him from the old videos. Mr. Taylor? Yes, he smiled. I wanted you to have this. He handed her a faded envelope. Your grandmother gave it to me for safekeeping. Said I'd know when it was time. Inside was a handwritten letter dated just days before Margaret's death. As Catherine read it, tears filled her eyes. My dearest Katie, it began. If you're reading this, then you found your way back to what truly matters. The medallion you wear isn't just a piece of jewelry, it's a compass pointing toward what's right. Business isn't just about profits, it's about creating possibilities. Each life we touch creates ripples that reach far beyond what we can see. The letter continued, revealing Margaret's hopes for her granddaughter and the company's future. She'd foreseen the challenges Catherine would face, the choices she'd have to make. I've watched you grow, the letter concluded, and I know that somewhere inside you burns the same fire that drove me to fight for what's right. Remember, darling, true wealth isn't counted in dollars, but in the lives we change, the hopes we nurture, and the communities we build. This is your legacy now. Make it shine. Catherine shared the letter with Sarah, who wiped away tears of her own. She never lost faith in you, Sarah said, even when you seemed furthest from her path. The next morning, Catherine called an unexpected press conference. Standing before the cameras, she made an announcement that would cement Brighton Investments' new direction. Today, we're establishing the Margaret Brighton Institute for Community Enterprise, she declared, a national center dedicated to teaching businesses how to integrate social responsibility with profitable growth. We'll provide resources, training, and support to companies ready to embrace a new way of doing business. The announcement made national headlines. Other corporations began reaching out, wanting to learn from the Brighton model. Catherine found herself speaking at business schools, sharing how ethical business practices could drive sustainable success. But it was the small moments that meant the most, like watching Tommy mentor a group of young entrepreneurs, or seeing Maria's daughter take over management of the expanded restaurant. Each success story added another thread to the tapestry of community that Margaret had begun weaving decades ago. One evening, as snow fell softly on the Christmas trees, Catherine found a young girl staring at the legacy wall in Sarah's office. "That's my grandma," Catherine told her, pointing to Margaret's photo. "She looks kind," the girl said, "like Mrs. Miller." She believed in helping people build their dreams. "Is that what the medallion means?" The girl pointed to Catherine's neck. "Yes," Catherine smiled. "It means we promise to help others just like others helped us." The girl nodded seriously. "When I grow up, I want to help people too." Catherine looked at Sarah, who was listening from the doorway. They both knew that this passing of values to the next generation was perhaps the greatest legacy of all. As Christmas approached, Catherine added a new tradition to the community center. Each year they would choose one family's story to engrave on a medallion, creating a growing chain of testimony to the power of community investment and faith in people. The first medallion told the story of the Martinez family, who had initially withdrawn their support out of fear, but returned to become one of the cooperative's strongest success stories. Their small construction company now employed 15 people and provided apprenticeships to local youth. "See," Sarah said, watching the Martinez children play in the community center. "This is how change happens. Not all at once, but person by person, story by story, dream by dream." Catherine looked around at what they'd built, not just the physical spaces, but the connections, the opportunities, the hope. This was what her grandmother had seen all those years ago. The endless possibilities that arose when business served humanity rather than the other way around. And as she touched the medallion at her neck, Catherine knew that this was just the beginning. The true power of legacy wasn't in preserving the past, but in using its lessons to build a better future, one life at a time.